It was a cold November morning when I found myself standing in front of a small, almost inconspicuous building in downtown Chicago. The building was tucked between two tall skyscrapers, the kind of place you would walk past without giving it a second thought. But for me, this was the culmination of years of work, failure, and learning. I was about to open the doors of my first business, a tech startup I'd poured every penny I had into. To understand how I got here, I have to rewind a bit. Growing up, I wasn't the kind of kid who had a clear vision of what I wanted to do. I wasn't one of those entrepreneurial types who set up lemonade stands or sold candy to other kids. In fact, I was a bit of a quiet nerd. I spent most of my time in front of a computer, playing video games, or tinkering with software. My friends always told me I'd end up working at some big tech company, but I never really thought about it that way. It wasn't until I reached college that things began to shift. I chose to major in computer science, but I still didn't have any grand ambitions. I thought I'd get a decent job in tech, work my way up the corporate ladder, and eventually find some stability. But that all changed one day in my sophomore year when I attended a guest lecture from an entrepreneur who had built a multi-million-dollar app from scratch. The speaker's story fascinated me. He didn't have a business background, no degree in economics or marketing. He was just a guy who identified a problem, built a solution, and turned it into something huge. That was the moment I caught the bug. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few months, I started experimenting with small ideas. I built a simple app to help people track their expenses, which gained a small user base. I didn't make any money off it, but I learned a lot about coding, user experience, and, more importantly, the kind of mindset it took to run a business. I was hooked, but that's when reality hit. My senior year, I was in a relationship that I thought was going to last. We made plans for the future, and I figured I'd get a steady job after graduation. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs, and my girlfriend broke up with me just before graduation. The breakup shook me more than I'd like to admit, but it also served as a wake-up call. If I was going to chase this dream of starting a business, now was the time. No more waiting. No more excuses. I had nothing to lose. The next few months were a blur. I spent all my savings on renting a small apartment in Chicago and set up a tiny home office. I started working on a new idea, a platform that would connect freelancers with businesses in need of short-term projects. It wasn't revolutionary, but I believed it was a service people would use. I spent days coding, learning about marketing, and trying to figure out how to make my idea stand out in an already crowded market. I hit roadblock after roadblock. The platform was buggy, the user interface was clunky, and it felt like nobody cared about what I was doing. I tried to get feedback from potential users, but most of the time, I'd get no response. I felt isolated, exhausted, and on the verge of giving up. But then, I remembered something the entrepreneur from that guest lecture had said: failure isn't the end. It's part of the process. Those words stuck with me. If I quit now, I'd never know what could have been. I decided to keep going, but with one important change. I reached out to others. I joined startup communities online, attended meetups, and connected with people who were in the same boat as me. That's when things started to shift. A couple of people I met online were willing to give me feedback on my platform, and some even offered to help with coding. Slowly but surely, my platform started to come together. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional, and that was enough for me to take the next step, launching it publicly. I launched the platform with no fanfare, no big marketing budget, no press releases. I just put it out there and waited. A few days passed, and then something unexpected happened. People started signing up. Slowly at first, but it was a start. I continued to improve the platform based on feedback, and as word spread, more freelancers and businesses started using it. It wasn't long before I had my first paying customer. A small company hired a freelancer through my platform for a short-term project, and I made my first $50. It wasn't much, but it was everything to me. It meant my idea had value. It meant I was on the right path. Over the next few months, the platform grew steadily. I continued to improve the user experience, adding new features, refining the design, and investing more time into marketing. But there were still plenty of challenges. I had to deal with competition from larger, more established companies, and there were times when it felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. But I kept pushing forward. I learned how to pitch to investors, how to network with potential partners, and most importantly, how to listen to my users. Eventually, after a year of working tirelessly, I secured a small round of funding that allowed me to bring on a team to help scale the platform. That's when things really started to take off. Fast forward to today, and my platform has grown into a business that serves thousands of freelancers and companies around the world. We've raised additional funding, expanded our services, and built a team of passionate people who believe in the mission. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we've come. There were so many moments where I doubted myself, where I thought about quitting, but every time, I reminded myself that success doesn't come overnight. What I've learned through this journey is that entrepreneurship isn't about having the perfect idea from the start. It's about persistence, adaptability, and the willingness to fail and try again. It's about finding the right people to support you and learning from every setback. Most importantly, it's about believing in yourself, even when nobody else does. And as I stand in front of that building in downtown Chicago, ready to open the doors to my business, I can't help but feel proud of what I've accomplished. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I'm proof that if you keep working at something long enough, even when it feels like you're not getting anywhere, you can turn a dream into a reality. But the journey's not over yet. There's still so much more to do. And as I open those doors and step inside, I know that this is only the beginning. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I've always considered myself a bit of a late bloomer, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship. I wasn't one of those kids who sold lemonade on the corner or had a side hustle from the time they could walk. In fact, growing up, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I did what most people do. I followed the path laid out for me. Graduated high school, went to college, got a safe job. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this safety was killing my potential. It was around my mid-20s when I had a full-on existential crisis. I remember sitting at my desk at my corporate job, looking out the window and thinking, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? I had a decent paycheck, health insurance, and benefits, but I felt like I was suffocating. My dreams were more like a faint echo, something I could barely hear over the daily grind of office life. I guess you could say I was bored. I wasn't even challenged anymore. It felt like I was just there to push papers around and keep my seat warm. That's when I started thinking about entrepreneurship, but I was terrified. I didn't have the confidence, the resources, or the connections to start something of my own. And to be honest, I wasn't sure where to begin. One evening, I was chatting with a friend who left his job a few months before to start an online business. He seemed so free, so fulfilled. I envied him. He had launched a small e-commerce store selling custom phone accessories, and he was making more money than he ever did working for someone else. I asked him how he did it, and he said something that stuck with me. Just start. You don't need everything to be perfect. In fact, it's better if it's not. It was one of those moments where the universe felt like it was speaking directly to me. Just start. That was the only advice I needed. But it wasn't as easy as it sounded. The first thing I did was go home and research. I spent hours reading articles, watching YouTube videos, and learning about e-commerce. I quickly realized that there were a million different ways to start a business, but one thing kept popping up: finding a niche. I didn't want to just sell anything. I wanted something that would make people's lives better, something I could be passionate about. I didn't want to dive into tech or something complicated. I didn't even want to be in the competitive world of clothing or gadgets. I thought about it for a few weeks, and then it hit me. What if I sold something that made people's homes more organized and efficient? Something practical. I'd always been obsessed with organization and keeping my living space neat, so I knew I wasn't the only one who cared about this. I decided to start small. I found a supplier that made high-quality storage bins and organizational tools, and I set up an online store. At first, I didn't have much, just a few products listed. I spent days designing a website on Shopify, learning how to set up payment systems, and making sure everything looked professional. The hardest part was figuring out how to drive traffic to my site. I didn't have a marketing budget, so I had to get creative. I started by using social media, sharing tips and tricks about organizing homes and spaces. I didn't push my products at first. I just wanted to build a following and provide value. I created an Instagram page where I posted before and after pictures of spaces I'd organized myself and offered free advice. Slowly but surely, people began following me, and I started gaining traction. I even set up a blog on my website and started writing about organization hacks and how to make the most of small spaces. Months went by, and I wasn't seeing much profit. In fact, I was barely covering my costs. But I wasn't ready to quit. I kept pushing. I started working with influencers, people with smaller but engaged followings, who shared their own organizational tips and promoted my products. I ran Facebook ads for the first time, and while the returns were modest at first, it started to grow. By the end of the first year, I had made a small profit, but more importantly, I had learned a lot. I realized that success didn't happen overnight. It was a combination of persistence, learning from mistakes, and continually adapting. I didn't have it all figured out, but I was making progress. The breakthrough came about a year and a half into my journey. I had grown a loyal customer base, and I had expanded my product line to include custom-made storage solutions. The real game changer was when I got a feature on a popular lifestyle blog that focused on home decor. The traffic to my site exploded overnight. I had hundreds of people visiting my site every day, and for the first time, I was making serious sales. My brand was starting to take off. At this point, I could finally quit my corporate job. I was making more from my side hustle than I had ever made in my 9-to-5. But that's not when the journey ended. In fact, it was just beginning. As my business grew, I had to hire employees, streamline my operations, and figure out how to scale. I realized that while I had gained success, it was only because I had been willing to put in the work, learn from my failures, and be patient. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I'm no longer a part of the rat race, working for someone else. I built something I'm truly proud of, and every day, I wake up excited to continue growing it. Entrepreneurship is hard. There's no shortcut. But if you're willing to take the leap, trust yourself, and keep going even when things aren't easy, you can make it. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that the only person standing in your way is you. Fear, self-doubt, and uncertainty are normal parts of the process, but you can't let them stop you from pursuing your dreams. My story isn't unique, but it's proof that it's never too late to start. Now, whenever I talk to someone who's thinking about making the leap into entrepreneurship, I give them the same advice my friend gave me. Just start. You don't need to know everything right away. Learn as you go. And that's exactly what I did. I was 24 when I first stepped into the world of entrepreneurship. At the time, I was fresh out of college with a degree in finance, but I felt this nagging feeling that there had to be more to life than working a 9-to-5 job. I had been offered a position at a prestigious investment firm, which everyone said was the dream job. It wasn't long before I realized that the dream was someone else's, definitely not mine. My obsession with independence and making my own decisions led me down the path of entrepreneurship. I spent every spare moment reading about successful businesses, watching YouTube videos on startups, and attending networking events. The idea of being my own boss had a strange allure, but I also felt terrified. The fear of failing, of sinking my life savings into something that might never work, was overwhelming. But the dream of being free from the corporate grind kept pushing me forward. I didn't know exactly what business I wanted to start, but I knew that I had to do something. The moment I realized that I needed to take the plunge came one afternoon when I was sitting in traffic on my way to the investment firm. I remember staring at the rearview mirror and realizing I wasn't just stuck in traffic, I was stuck in life. That was my wake-up call. After months of deliberation, I quit my job. I took all the savings I had, which wasn't much, and decided to start an e-commerce business. The world of online retail had fascinated me for years, and I thought I could create something unique. I chose to sell high-end custom phone cases, something I had no prior experience in. My reasoning was simple. There was a growing demand for personalized accessories, and if I could create something with a personal touch, it would stand out in the crowded market. At first, everything was a disaster. I made mistake after mistake. My website looked terrible. I didn't know the first thing about digital marketing, and I had no idea how to deal with suppliers. I remember spending hours learning how to use Shopify, which felt like a foreign language. I was constantly looking up tutorials and reading blog posts to figure out how to make my website look professional. I started with Facebook ads, hoping to attract customers. I didn't know how to target the right audience, and as a result, my ads were completely ineffective. I lost hundreds of dollars in the first month, and the sales? Zero. There were days when I would sit in front of my computer, staring at the screen, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But I didn't give up. I reached out to mentors, entrepreneurs who had been where I was and had successfully navigated the early stages of business. I started learning about SEO, Google Ads, and influencer marketing. It was a lot to take in, but little by little, I began to see the pieces fall into place. One day, I decided to take a chance and reach out to a well-known tech influencer on Instagram. I sent them a free custom phone case, hoping they would post about it. I had no expectation, just the hope that I could get a little bit of exposure. To my surprise, the influencer loved the product and posted about it. Within hours, my website started to get traffic, and for the first time, I saw actual sales. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show me that this could work. With that small win, I went all in. I doubled down on influencer marketing, building relationships with influencers who had smaller followings but highly engaged audiences. I made sure my products stood out in terms of quality and design. Slowly but surely, my business grew. I reinvested every penny I earned back into the business, improving my website, refining my ads, and expanding my product line. But then, the unexpected happened. My business hit a plateau. After a year of steady growth, the sales started to level off. I had made a name for myself in the custom phone case industry, but the competition was fierce, and my profit margins were shrinking. The idea of scaling seemed impossible. I knew that if I didn't find a way to stand out even more, my business would stall. That's when I decided to pivot. I thought back to my roots in finance and the skills I had acquired during my time at the investment firm. I knew that one thing I could leverage was data, lots of it. I began collecting detailed analytics on customer behavior, trends, and purchasing patterns. I started using this data to personalize my marketing strategies, tailoring them to each customer's preferences. I invested in email marketing and retargeting ads, which helped drive repeat business. I also expanded my product line. I realized that phone cases weren't enough. I started introducing complementary accessories like wireless chargers, headphones, and phone stands, products that appealed to the same customer base but offered higher profit margins. By diversifying my products, I was able to offer more value to my customers and increase my average order value. The pivot worked. My business saw a significant surge in sales. The new products resonated with customers, and the data-driven marketing strategies helped me to reach people who were genuinely interested in what I was offering. My brand began to stand out in the marketplace, not just for the quality of the products, but for the personalized experience I was able to provide. As my business grew, I faced new challenges, managing inventory, hiring employees, dealing with suppliers, and handling the ever-increasing pressure to keep up with demand. But with each obstacle, I became more confident in my abilities to navigate the complexities of running a business. I learned to delegate tasks, invest in systems that made operations smoother, and scale without compromising on quality. It wasn't always easy, but every setback and challenge taught me something valuable. The road to success wasn't linear, and there were times when I doubted myself, but I kept pushing forward. Looking back, I realized that the key to success wasn't just having a great idea. It was about perseverance and adaptability. Today, my business is worth millions, and I'm living a life I never thought possible. I have a team of amazing people who work with me to keep the business running smoothly, and I've had the privilege of helping other aspiring entrepreneurs get their start. My story is a reminder that success isn't an overnight thing. It's about resilience, learning from your mistakes, and constantly striving to improve. If I could give any advice to someone starting their entrepreneurial journey, it would be this: don't be afraid to fail. Failure is not the end. It's part of the process. If you're passionate, determined, and willing to learn, you can turn your dream into reality. I did it, and you can too. I was 24 when I took my first real leap into entrepreneurship. At the time, I was working as a junior marketing analyst for a small company that barely paid me enough to cover rent and utilities. My dream of owning a business had always lingered in the back of my mind, but it was one of those dreams I never dared to chase. It felt too far out of reach, and honestly, I wasn't sure I had what it took. But one night, after a brutal day at work, I had this epiphany. I was sitting in my apartment, scrolling through Instagram, when I saw an ad for a unique type of eco-friendly backpack. The style was sleek, the design was minimalist, and the product had all these sustainable features I'd never seen in a bag before. My first thought was, why doesn't anyone in my social circle know about this? That's when the idea hit me. What if I could create something similar, a product that was not just practical but also served a greater purpose? Something with a social and environmental impact. I had been a nature lover my whole life, and the idea of creating a sustainable brand appealed to me on a deeply personal level. I had no idea how to start a business, though. I had some savings from my job, But it wasn't much, maybe around $10,000. In my head, that was all the money I'd ever need. Little did I know, that was just the beginning of a long and grueling journey. I started by doing research. I poured hours into learning about product sourcing, manufacturing, and branding. I bought books, listened to podcasts, and reached out to anyone who had experience with eco-friendly products. At first, I was overwhelmed. The world of business felt like a foreign language, and I was lost in the jargon. But slowly, I started to piece things together. I spent weeks just figuring out what kind of bag I wanted to create. I didn't want it to be just another backpack. I wanted it to stand for something. So I decided on a bag that could be used in multiple settings: work, travel, and leisure. The goal was for it to be versatile and durable, using materials that would reduce the environmental footprint. My first step was finding a manufacturer. I scoured the internet, contacted dozens of suppliers, and asked for quotes. Some companies were too expensive, others didn't align with my values, and a few just flat out didn't respond. Eventually, I stumbled upon a small factory in Vietnam that specialized in sustainable products. After multiple rounds of emails and video calls, I agreed to work with them, even though the process was a lot more complicated than I had anticipated. With the manufacturer secured, I turned my attention to branding and marketing. I knew I couldn't afford a big advertising budget, so I had to get creative. I began reaching out to influencers in the sustainability space, offering them free products in exchange for reviews and shoutouts. Some ignored me, others turned me down, but a handful said yes. Slowly but surely, my small brand began to grow a presence on social media. I built a website, hired a freelance graphic designer to help with the branding, and started running ads on Facebook and Instagram. It wasn't glamorous, but I was getting some traction. Then, disaster struck. My first batch of bags arrived, and they were nothing like what I had expected. The stitching was uneven, the zippers were faulty, and one of the colors didn't match the sample. I felt crushed. Here I was, thinking I was on the cusp of success, and the reality of my business was falling apart. I spent weeks negotiating with the manufacturer, demanding they fix the issues. They were apologetic but insisted it would take a month to make the corrections. I didn't have that kind of time. I had already invested most of my savings, and without a successful launch, I was done. So I took a deep breath, gathered the most professional emails I could muster, and contacted every influencer and customer who had pre-ordered. I explained the situation honestly, told them there would be a delay, and offered them a discount on future orders. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated my transparency, and most said they were happy to wait for a quality product. I learned a vital lesson. Honesty goes a long way in business, especially when things go wrong. The bags finally arrived a month later, and I launched my website with a limited inventory. I spent hours trying to figure out how to drive traffic to the site. I used every free marketing tactic I could find: guest blogging, reaching out to journalists, and posting in Facebook groups related to sustainability. Slowly but surely, orders began to trickle in. It wasn't a flood of sales like I had hoped, but it was enough to keep me going. The next 6 months were a blur of learning, testing, and refining. I experimented with different pricing strategies, ran more paid ads, and even attended local pop-up events to showcase my bags. Sales grew steadily, but it wasn't until I hit my 1-year mark that things really started to take off. My social media following had exploded, and I had built a loyal customer base that loved the mission behind my brand. The eco-friendly aspect had become a huge selling point, and the bags were starting to sell out faster than I could restock. But just as I thought things were going smoothly, I ran into another roadblock: inventory. I had underestimated how quickly demand would grow, and I was faced with the challenge of scaling up. I had to find new suppliers, negotiate better pricing, and figure out how to handle shipping logistics on a larger scale. It felt like I was always playing catch-up, but I learned to delegate tasks. I hired my first employee, a customer service rep who helped me manage orders, and later brought on a logistics manager to help streamline shipping. It was a game changer. By the time my company turned 2 years old, I had expanded my product line to include other eco-friendly items: laptop sleeves, water bottles, and even recycled tote bags. My revenue had tripled, and I was starting to see a steady flow of passive income. But the journey wasn't over. I continued to push for more innovation and sustainability. I partnered with a nonprofit that planted a tree for every bag sold, further solidifying my brand's mission. Looking back, it's incredible to see how far I've come. From that lonely apartment, where I first had the idea, to running a growing business with employees, it's been a roller coaster of emotions. There were days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if it was all worth it. But now, at 26, I feel like I'm just getting started. I've learned more in the last 2 years than I ever did in school or my first job. And while the future is uncertain, one thing is for sure. I'll never stop chasing my dream of building something bigger than just a product, something that makes a real difference. The moral of my story? If you've got a passion and the willingness to learn from your mistakes, anything is possible. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but the journey is worth every obstacle you'll face along the way. I'll never forget the day I decided to start my own business. It wasn't the smoothest journey, and it definitely wasn't something I had ever planned on doing, but somehow, I ended up building something I could be proud of. It all started in my small apartment in the city. I was working as a marketing associate for a tech company, a decent job by most standards, but I hated every minute of it. The office was full of people I couldn't relate to. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of corporate jargon and endless PowerPoint presentations. I was good at what I did, no doubt about that, but I was suffocating. I had always been an ambitious person, even though I hadn't figured out how to channel that ambition into something meaningful yet. One night, after another 12-hour day of analyzing spreadsheets and drafting reports, I came home to a cluttered apartment, tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, and collapsed onto the couch. I turned on the TV, but nothing held my attention. My mind kept wandering. It was like a light bulb flicked on in my head. Why was I working so hard for someone else when I could be working hard for myself? I had an idea, a crazy, seemingly impossible idea. What if I started a business? Not just any business, but an online platform that helped small business owners with digital marketing? I knew the tech side, and I had a deep understanding of marketing, and small businesses were constantly looking for cost-effective ways to grow. It seemed like a perfect match. But, of course, my first instinct was to doubt myself. I didn't have a background in entrepreneurship. I didn't have savings. I didn't even know where to begin. So, I let the idea simmer in my mind, telling myself that I needed to research, learn more, and figure out how to turn this vague thought into reality. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of late nights spent Googling everything I could about starting a business. I joined online forums, watched hours of YouTube videos, and listened to every entrepreneur podcast I could find. Slowly, the fog started lifting. I realized I didn't need to know everything up front. I just needed to take action. The best entrepreneurs, I discovered, weren't the ones with the most knowledge. They were the ones who were willing to jump in and figure things out as they went. By the time I had saved up a small emergency fund, I decided to take the plunge. I quit my corporate job, much to the confusion of my friends and family. Everyone thought I was crazy, and maybe I was. But the moment I handed in my resignation letter, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had no idea what was ahead, but I knew one thing. I would never go back to working for someone else. The first few months were tough, to put it mildly. I started by freelancing, offering digital marketing services to small businesses in my city. My first client was a local bakery that wanted to improve its online presence. I remember spending hours crafting the perfect Instagram posts, writing blog articles, and setting up Google Ads. The client was happy, but it didn't come without its challenges. I was learning on the go, often making mistakes, but each mistake taught me something valuable. During that period, I learned the importance of patience and persistence. There were many sleepless nights, wondering whether I had made the right decision. Would the business take off? Would I be able to make a living doing this? Some days, I felt like giving up, but I kept going, knowing that every step forward, no matter how small, was a step toward building something bigger. Over time, things started to pick up. I gained more clients, and my reputation for delivering results began to grow. By the end of the first year, I had enough clients to hire a small team. I brought on a couple of talented people I had met through networking, an SEO expert and a content writer, and we began to build out our services. I still remember the day we got our first big client, a national chain of coffee shops that needed help with their digital marketing strategy. It was a huge deal. I was terrified. I had no experience working with such a large client, but I couldn't afford to turn them down. We put everything we had into that project, working around the clock to make sure we delivered exactly what they needed. The results were incredible. Their online sales tripled in just a few months, and we gained a reputation as the go-to agency for small businesses looking to scale their marketing. By year 2, I had expanded the business even further, bringing in more clients from across the country. We were no longer just a small local service. We were becoming a full-fledged agency. I had learned so much along the way, and I was able to share that knowledge with my team, empowering them to take on more responsibility. It wasn't always easy. There were plenty of growing pains, long hours, and tough decisions. But there were also moments of pure exhilaration. I had gone from a marketing associate in a stuffy office to the CEO of my own company. However, with success came new challenges. As the business grew, I had to learn to balance the demands of managing a team, handling finances, and still staying involved in the work itself. The pressure of keeping everything afloat became overwhelming at times, and there were moments when I questioned whether I was cut out for this. But every time I felt like giving up, I would remind myself of why I started. I had created something from nothing, and I wasn't about to throw it all away now. The turning point came when I decided to invest in automation tools and software to streamline operations. I had been so caught up in the day-to-day grind that I hadn't realized how much time I was wasting on manual tasks. Once I implemented systems that allowed us to automate repetitive processes, everything changed. The business became more efficient, and we could focus more on creativity and strategy rather than spending hours on administrative work. By year 5, we had grown into a fully operational digital marketing agency with a diverse portfolio of clients. We had expanded our services to include social media management, branding, and even web development. The company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And with each new milestone, I felt a renewed sense of pride. Looking back now, I can hardly believe how far we've come. There were countless moments when I thought the road ahead would be impossible, but each obstacle was an opportunity to learn and grow. Starting a business wasn't easy, but it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. In the end, the journey was never about becoming wealthy or famous. It was about taking control of my life, creating something I believed in, and proving to myself that I was capable of more than I ever thought possible. It wasn't a linear path, and it certainly wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And that, to me, was worth all the struggles. I was 22 years old when I launched my first business. It wasn't glamorous, nor did I have a grand vision of transforming the world. Honestly, I was just a broke college student who had enough of scraping by. I was tired of working 20-hour weeks in a coffee shop for minimum wage while watching my peers get internships that paid more than I was making in an entire month. I figured there had to be a better way, and I was determined to find it. I had been running a small eBay store for a couple of years selling random products, mostly used textbooks and old electronics. It wasn't making me rich, but it paid for the extra stuff I wanted. My mind wandered to one idea I kept hearing about from people on forums: dropshipping. It seemed like the ideal business model. Sell products without holding inventory, create a website, drive traffic to it, and make money when people ordered. It sounded too good to be true, but at that point, I was willing to try anything. I remember the first night I decided to go for it. I spent hours researching how to build a Shopify store and how to find reliable suppliers. The process was both overwhelming and exciting. There were so many moving parts, but I was determined. My initial plan was to sell a niche product, customizable phone cases. It wasn't something I was passionate about, but I figured that if I could get the marketing right, it could work. I knew people loved personalizing their phones, so why not offer them a way to do it without having to leave their homes? The next few weeks were a blur. I spent every waking moment learning how to run Facebook ads, how to write persuasive product descriptions, and how to set up an automated email sequence. I was constantly testing and tweaking my website to make it look more professional, even though I had no real design experience. I just followed what the gurus said and hoped something would stick. It didn't. The first month, I barely made any sales. Maybe one or two here and there, but it wasn't enough to cover the cost of the ads I was running. My budget was tight, and I found myself getting discouraged. I remember one night I sat down and almost gave up. I thought to myself, maybe this whole dropshipping thing is a scam. Maybe I'm just not cut out for it. But I wasn't ready to quit. I had invested too much time, energy, and money into this. So, I did what any stubborn 22-year-old would do. I pivoted. Instead of selling customizable phone cases, I switched to selling a different niche that was trending: fitness accessories. I'd seen influencers promoting resistance bands and yoga mats, and they were flying off the virtual shelves. I figured if I could find the right products and advertise them correctly, it might just work. This time, I made sure to get a few influencers to review my products. I didn't have the money to pay for a huge celebrity endorsement, but micro-influencers with 10,000 followers were affordable and still had decent engagement rates. Slowly but surely, sales started trickling in. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. By month 3, I was breaking even. By month 6, I was actually making a profit. I was still living on a tight budget, but I could afford the essentials and reinvest my profits into growing the business. It felt good to see the hard work pay off, but I knew I wasn't out of the woods yet. By the time I hit my first-year mark, things had changed significantly. I had built a more streamlined process for sourcing products, handling customer service, and fulfilling orders. I hired a virtual assistant to help with customer support, which freed up my time to focus on marketing and scaling. I also expanded my product range to include supplements, apparel, and even fitness equipment. The business had grown to a point where I could comfortably pay myself and invest in more ambitious marketing campaigns. But this is where things really took a turn. A friend of mine had been keeping an eye on my progress, and one day he pulled me aside and asked, "Have you ever thought about turning your business into a brand?" He wasn't the first person to say something like that, but his words struck a chord. Up until then, I had been operating like any other dropshipper, slinging products with a low profit margin and little to no brand identity. I was just another faceless online store. But what if I could change that? I immediately began researching what it would take to transform my business into a recognizable brand. I started with a new logo, packaging, and a website redesign. I worked on building a community around my products, engaging with customers on social media, and creating content that was authentic and relatable. I began to focus on the long term instead of the quick wins. That's when everything clicked. The brand I was building wasn't just about selling products. It was about creating an experience. I wanted people to feel like they were part of something bigger. The sales started to climb, but more importantly, I started receiving messages from customers telling me how much they loved the products and how they had improved their fitness journeys. That feedback was priceless. Fast forward to today, and I've sold my dropshipping store for a solid six-figure sum. I don't want to go into the details of the sale, but it was a huge relief. I've transitioned to focusing on my next big venture, which is a wellness brand that I'm building from the ground up. I've hired a team of people who are as passionate about the mission as I am. And while I still remember the late nights of struggling with Shopify and wondering if I'd ever make it, I now see how far I've come. The journey wasn't easy. There were countless obstacles along the way: failed ad campaigns, late-night troubleshooting, supplier issues, and endless self-doubt. But there was also a lot of growth, learning, and moments of clarity. The biggest lesson I learned through it all is that success doesn't happen overnight. You have to be willing to fail, pivot, and keep going even when things get tough. The road isn't linear, and you can't always predict when your breakthrough will come. But if you stay consistent, keep learning, and adapt to the changing landscape, success is possible. Now, at 27, I look back at that 22-year-old me who was just trying to make a few extra bucks and can't help but smile. I've learned so much about business, marketing, and resilience. But more importantly, I've learned that the real reward comes not just from the money, but from the freedom to pursue your passions and create something that can make a real impact in the world. So, if you're reading this and you're thinking about starting your own business, just know this: it's not going to be easy, but it is going to be worth it. Don't expect overnight success, and don't let failures discourage you. Keep pushing forward. Your success story might just be around the corner. This is a story of how I turned a failed business idea into a profitable online empire, all while working from my tiny apartment. It's a story of persistence, learning from mistakes, and making a lot of sacrifices. And, as the title suggests, it wasn't an overnight success. In fact, it all started with a complete disaster. A little over 5 years ago, I was working a 9-to-5 job at a marketing firm in a city that never seemed to sleep. I was in my mid-20s, single, and living in a small apartment. Life was, well, comfortable, but I wasn't satisfied. I was constantly thinking about something bigger, something I could own and create myself. I wasn't sure what that was at the time, but the seed of entrepreneurship had been planted, and I couldn't shake the idea. After months of mulling over ideas, I decided to launch an online store selling custom-designed t-shirts. I had always been a creative person, and I thought, why not turn my designs into a product that people would buy? The concept was simple. I would make a website, design some cool graphics, and market the shirts to my friends and social media followers. Surely, I thought, if I could sell just a few shirts, I could grow the business and maybe even quit my day job. How hard could it be? I launched my website with an excited heart and a budget of $500, which I had scrimped together from my paycheck. I thought I had everything in place, good designs, an easy-to-navigate site, and even a marketing plan that included ads on Facebook and Instagram. I took to social media, posting about my new store, hoping that the likes and shares would come pouring in. But here's the problem. Nothing happened. At all. No sales. No clicks. Just crickets. At first, I assumed it was just a slow start, so I gave it a few more days. But the silence was deafening. I was losing money on ads, and the website traffic was laughable. I didn't understand why people weren't responding to what I thought was a fantastic product. My friends and family were supportive, but their words of encouragement didn't translate into dollars. After 2 weeks of disappointing results, I decided to take a step back and reevaluate. I realized I had made a critical mistake. I hadn't done enough market research. I was just selling products based on what I thought was cool, without taking into account what people actually wanted. I hadn't figured out who my target audience was, and I had no real strategy for growing my business. It was time for a hard reset. I spent the next month researching the t-shirt market. What types of designs were popular, which niches had the most demand, and how successful stores were structuring their marketing. I scoured Reddit, YouTube, and every business blog I could find. Slowly, I began to grasp the importance of niche marketing. I needed to focus on a specific audience rather than trying to be everything to everyone. Armed with new knowledge, I relaunched my store, but this time, I focused on a very specific niche, graphic tees for gamers. I had noticed that a lot of gaming-related merchandise was either too generic or poorly made, so I decided to target that audience. I spent weeks researching the gaming community, reading forums, and interacting with gamers online to understand what kind of designs they were passionate about. I also started building a presence on platforms like Reddit and Discord, where gamers tend to hang out. The new approach started to show promise. Slowly but surely, I made my first sale. Then another. Then a handful of sales came in, and I was starting to feel hopeful again. However, there was still a major challenge. I was still spending too much money on ads, and the profit margins were low. I had to figure out how to make this business sustainable without burning through all my savings. I realized I needed to cut back on the ad spend and focus more on organic marketing. I started collaborating with influencers in the gaming space, offering them free shirts in exchange for promoting my brand on their social media accounts. I also began reaching out to gaming streamers on Twitch, offering them my designs in hopes they would wear them on their streams. Slowly, word started to spread. But even with the steady flow of orders, it wasn't enough. I was still working my 9-to-5 job, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to juggle the demands of my business with my full-time responsibilities. I was working nights, weekends, and early mornings to fulfill orders, update the website, and handle customer inquiries. It was exhausting, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep it up. One day, I had a conversation with a fellow entrepreneur who had successfully scaled his own business. He told me something that changed everything. You can't do everything yourself. If you want to grow, you need to delegate. That hit me hard. I had been trying to do everything on my own because I was afraid of spending money on employees or outsourcing tasks. But the reality was, I couldn't grow my business if I was still acting like a one-person operation. I started outsourcing some of the work, starting with customer service. I hired a virtual assistant who helped me respond to emails and manage social media accounts. I also started using third-party printing and fulfillment services to handle the production and shipping of my shirts. That freed up a lot of my time and allowed me to focus on scaling my marketing efforts. Over the next few months, my sales grew exponentially. The extra time and help made all the difference. I was able to reinvest profits into new designs and expand my product line. By the end of that year, I had quit my 9-to-5 job to focus full-time on my business. Fast forward to today, and my t-shirt business is a six-figure company. I've expanded into other niches within the gaming community, and I now have a team of 5 employees who help with everything from design to marketing. I've learned so much along the way, from making mistakes to finding the right people to trust and build with. But the most important lesson I've learned is that success doesn't come overnight. It takes hard work, sacrifice, and a willingness to learn and adapt. I've failed many times, but each failure was just another step toward figuring out what worked. If there's one thing I wish I could tell my younger self, it would be this. Don't give up after the first failure. Keep tweaking, keep learning, and keep pushing forward. The journey wasn't easy, and there were times when I thought about giving up, but here I am today, living the dream that seemed impossible when I first started. And if I can do it, so can you. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone's business. It wasn't the kind of place where big dreams were nurtured. People worked at the local factory, the diner, or the gas station, and that was pretty much the extent of it. I always felt like there was more out there for me, though, like there was something bigger I was supposed to do. I was always the idea person. I'd sit with my friends and talk about the latest business trends, technology, and how I could totally revolutionize some random industry. They'd all laugh and joke about how I was always so ambitious. But the truth was, I had a fire in me, and I couldn't shake the thought that I was meant for more. When I turned 18, I moved to the city. The buzz of it was everything I'd imagined. It was big, loud, and full of energy. I could feel the excitement coursing through my veins every time I walked down the street. But at the same time, it was overwhelming. I didn't know anyone, I had no money, and I had zero connections. I knew I'd have to work my way up from the bottom, but I was ready. I found a small apartment and took on 2 jobs, one in retail and another in a coffee shop. Neither of them paid well, but they kept me afloat. I was hustling every day, working double shifts, trying to make ends meet, but something still didn't feel right. I was living the grind, but I wasn't making any progress toward what I truly wanted, starting my own business. So, I decided to take a risk. I saved up a little bit of money, just enough to cover a few months' worth of expenses, and took the plunge into entrepreneurship. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to create something that could help people. I spent days reading books, watching videos, and talking to anyone who had any experience with starting a business. I had no idea how to build a product or even how to market it, but I figured I could learn along the way. One night, as I was scrolling through social media, I noticed something. There was a growing trend of people posting about their fitness journeys. Everyone was talking about how they were trying to get in shape, lose weight, and feel better about themselves. It clicked for me. I had always been into fitness, and I knew there were so many people who struggled with finding the right routine or staying motivated. I could create a platform where people could access fitness plans tailored to their needs, with guidance and support along the way. It was a simple idea, but I figured it was a good starting point. I didn't have the money to hire a team or invest in a fancy app, so I started small. I built a basic website and created a few fitness plans. I used social media to market my service, and while it wasn't an overnight success, I started to gain traction. People were signing up, and they seemed to like what I was offering. But the road wasn't smooth. There were days when I didn't have any new customers, and I started to doubt myself. I was living on a shoestring budget, constantly worrying about whether I could make rent or if I'd have to go back to a 9-to-5 job. But every time I felt like quitting, I'd get a message from someone telling me how much my service had helped them. That was all I needed to keep going. After a few months, I realized I had to step up my game if I wanted this business to succeed. I invested in a better website, hired a freelance designer to make everything look more professional, and created a mobile-friendly version of the platform. I also began offering personalized coaching services for an additional fee. Slowly but surely, I began to build a customer base that was loyal and passionate about what I was doing. But the real turning point came when I partnered with a popular fitness influencer who had millions of followers. I didn't have any direct connections to her, but I reached out anyway. To my surprise, she responded. We set up a meeting, and I pitched my business to her. She loved the idea and agreed to promote it on her social media. That one partnership changed everything. My traffic exploded. I had to hire more people to handle customer service and technical support. I expanded my offerings to include meal plans, fitness equipment recommendations, and even live workout sessions. I went from barely scraping by to making 6 figures within the next year. Even with the success, I still wasn't satisfied. There were so many people I wanted to help, and the market was saturated with fitness programs. So, I started to think bigger. Instead of just offering fitness plans, I wanted to create a community, a place where people could find not just a fitness program, but the support and encouragement to change their lives. So, I launched an app that allowed people to connect with others on similar journeys, join challenges, and track their progress. I hired trainers, dietitians, and mental health coaches to ensure we were offering a holistic approach to wellness. The app took off, and I was able to scale my business even further. My income skyrocketed, but so did my sense of fulfillment. I wasn't just making money, I was making a difference. The feedback I got from users was incredible. People were telling me how much my app had helped them lose weight, gain confidence, and feel better about themselves. It was more than just business, it was personal. But, of course, the journey wasn't without its challenges. The larger my company grew, the more I had to manage. I had to deal with competitors trying to steal my ideas, unforeseen technical issues, and even moments where I had to make tough decisions about whether to keep investing in growth or slow things down to focus on quality. There were many sleepless nights where I doubted whether I was doing the right thing, but every time I hit a roadblock, I found a way to push through. Fast forward to today, and I run a multi-million-dollar wellness company. I'm not a fitness expert by trade, but I've built a team of incredible people who are. I've created a product that's changing lives, and I've learned more about entrepreneurship than I could have ever imagined. But more than anything, I've learned that success isn't about just having a great idea. It's about persistence, adaptability, and a willingness to keep going, even when things seem impossible. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at how clueless I was when I first started. I had no money, no experience, and no network. But I had something more important, belief in myself, and a relentless drive to turn my vision into reality. And that, more than anything else, has been the key to my success. If there's one thing I can say to anyone who's thinking about starting their own business, it's this: don't wait for the perfect moment. You'll never have everything you need when you start. Just start. You'll learn as you go, and the obstacles you face will teach you the lessons you need to succeed. Keep pushing, stay focused, and don't let fear hold you back. You have no idea what you're capable of until you try. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 8 years, and my journey wasn't a straight path. In fact, it was anything but. From the outside, it may seem like I had a plan all along, but I assure you, I didn't. What I had was a lot of hustle, a little bit of luck, and a whole lot of failure. I want to share with you how I turned a broke, lost, and hopeless situation into a thriving business that now supports my family and allows me to live the life I've always dreamed of. It all started in 2017. I had just graduated from college with a degree in communications, and to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. The job market was terrible. I sent out resumes for months, got no responses, and watched as my peers landed positions while I struggled to make ends meet. At the time, I was living in a small apartment with my then girlfriend, now wife. We were barely scraping by, and every month, it seemed like we were one bill away from disaster. One night, after another exhausting job search session, I had what seemed like a random idea. What if I started a side hustle? It wasn't a new concept, but it was new to me. I had always been the type of person who relied on the traditional route: school, internship, job. The idea of starting something on my own felt incredibly risky, but I didn't have much to lose. I wasn't happy, and I was already struggling, so what did I have to fear? I thought about what I was good at. I had a knack for writing and a decent understanding of marketing. So, I decided to try my hand at copywriting. It was a skill that seemed relatively easy to pick up, and it didn't require any big investments. I went online, found a few resources, and taught myself the basics of copywriting. I wasn't an expert, but I was eager to learn and improve. At first, I took on small gigs, anything I could get. I wrote blog posts, email newsletters, and website copy for a few clients I found on freelancing platforms. The pay was terrible, but I didn't care. I was learning, and that was enough for me. Slowly, I began to build a portfolio and gain some traction. After a few months, I had a handful of clients, but I still wasn't making enough to live comfortably. I realized that if I wanted to make this work long-term, I needed to scale up. The problem was that I didn't know how. I had no mentors, no roadmap, and no idea how to market myself. I was just a guy trying to make it work. Then, one night, while scrolling through Reddit, which is where I spend way too much of my free time, I stumbled upon a post about how some freelance copywriters had turned their side hustles into full-fledged businesses. They were talking about creating packages, raising rates, and building relationships with clients. That's when it clicked. I realized that I had been approaching this the wrong way. I had been focusing on getting as many small jobs as possible, but I wasn't thinking about the long term. I wasn't positioning myself as an expert or offering clients value beyond just writing words. So, I started to rethink my approach. First, I raised my rates. I was nervous about this at first, but I realized that if I wanted to work with better clients, I had to offer more value. I began focusing on high-quality, high-paying projects, rather than taking on everything I could find. I started packaging my services into 3 tiers: basic copywriting, premium copywriting, and a complete marketing package. This allowed me to attract a wider range of clients, from small startups to larger companies. Next, I focused on building relationships. Instead of just completing jobs and moving on to the next, I started checking in with past clients and asking for feedback. I offered additional services when appropriate and always made sure to deliver exceptional work. Slowly but surely, my reputation grew. In 2018, things really started to take off. I was consistently booked with clients, and my income was more than enough to support myself and my girlfriend. However, just as things were looking up, life threw me a curveball. My girlfriend got a job offer in another city, and we had to make the decision to either stay in our current location or take a leap and move. The idea of starting over in a new city was terrifying, especially since my business was just beginning to take off. But after a lot of discussions and weighing the pros and cons, we decided to go for it. We moved to a new city, and I continued to work on my freelance business. It was tough at first: new city, new clients, new challenges, but I was determined. During this time, I also started branching out into content marketing. I knew that if I wanted to grow my business even more, I needed to offer more than just copywriting. I began creating online courses for aspiring copywriters and marketers. These courses, although a huge investment in terms of time and energy, paid off in ways I couldn't have imagined. By the end of 2019, I had scaled my business to the point where I was able to hire a few employees and start outsourcing work. My days of scrambling for clients were behind me. I had created a brand that stood for quality, reliability, and results. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Fast forward to today. My business has grown exponentially. We have a team of 15 employees, and we offer a wide range of services, from copywriting and content marketing to full-scale digital marketing campaigns. We've worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, and my life has completely changed. My wife and I bought a house, and we are expecting our first child. My income has skyrocketed, but more importantly, I've found something that I love doing. Looking back, I can say that the turning point for me wasn't the moment I decided to start my business. It was the moment I decided to stop thinking small and start thinking big. The moment I decided to raise my rates, deliver more value, and build relationships rather than just chasing money. If you're reading this and you're stuck in a job you hate or thinking about starting your own business, my advice is simple: take the leap. You don't need everything to be perfect. You just need to start. And when you do, don't be afraid to adjust, learn, and grow. It won't happen overnight, but if you keep at it, the payoff is worth it. So to anyone out there who's struggling or wondering if they can make it as an entrepreneur, yes, you can. But it takes time, persistence, and the willingness to learn from every failure. Keep going, and eventually, you'll look back and realize just how far you've come. I never thought I would be an entrepreneur. To be honest, I always considered myself more of a follow-the-rules kind of person, someone who did what was expected of them. My story starts back in 2016, when I was working a dead-end job at a tech support call center. I had just graduated college with a degree in computer science, but the job market was tough. Instead of working for a big company like I had hoped, I found myself answering calls from frustrated customers, trying to fix their printer issues or helping them reset their passwords. At first, I didn't mind the work. I figured it was just a stepping stone, a way to pay the bills while I looked for something better. But over time, the monotony started to eat at me. I hated the feeling of being stuck in a cubicle, answering the same questions every day, with the same scripts and the same tired routine. I knew I was capable of more. But at the same time, I didn't have the courage to step out and try something new. One evening, as I was browsing through Reddit, like I often did after work, I stumbled upon a post that changed everything. It was from a guy who had quit his job in IT to start a tech company. His story was inspiring, full of grit and determination. He had started with nothing, just an idea and a laptop, and within a few years, he had built a thriving business. Reading the post sparked something inside me. Maybe I could do that too. Maybe I could build something from scratch. But I didn't know where to start. I spent the next few weeks obsessing over the idea. I started reading everything I could about entrepreneurship, from books to blogs to podcasts. I watched YouTube videos of entrepreneurs sharing their stories and failures. I learned about marketing, customer acquisition, and the importance of having a unique value proposition. Slowly, a vision started to form in my mind. I could create an online business. But what kind of business? Then, one night while watching a YouTube tutorial on how to build websites, it hit me. What if I used my skills to help small businesses get online? I had always been good with computers, and I knew how to build websites. There were countless small business owners who didn't have the time or expertise to create a website for themselves. This was my chance. I could start a web development agency, helping local businesses set up professional websites that would give them a competitive edge. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to share my idea and have people shoot it down before I even tried. I started working on a simple website for myself, just a landing page explaining what services I would offer. I spent nights and weekends building the site, learning how to market it, and figuring out the best way to reach potential clients. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After a couple of weeks, I decided it was time to put myself out there. I reached out to a few local businesses that I thought might need a website, but I quickly learned that getting a foot in the door was harder than I thought. I was met with rejection after rejection. One person told me they already had a website. Another said they weren't interested. Some didn't even respond to my emails. I almost gave up, but I remembered something I had read in one of the many books I'd consumed about entrepreneurship. Rejection is just part of the journey. So, I kept going. I refined my pitch, improved my website, and tried again. This time, I didn't just send out cold emails. I visited businesses in person. I showed up with my laptop, ready to demonstrate how I could help them. I wasn't just offering a service. I was offering a solution to their problems. It paid off. After a few weeks of persistence, I landed my first client. It wasn't much, a small local restaurant that needed a simple website to showcase their menu and contact information, but it was a start. I worked day and night to build the site, making sure it was perfect. When I finally launched it, I felt a sense of accomplishment like nothing I had ever experienced before. From there, things started to snowball. My first client referred me to another, and then another. Slowly, I built a small but steady stream of work. It wasn't easy. There were long hours, late nights, and moments when I questioned whether it was all worth it. But each project taught me something new. I learned how to manage clients, how to communicate better, and how to price my services. I learned the importance of networking and asking for referrals. And most importantly, I learned to embrace failure as part of the process. One of the biggest challenges I faced in the early days was figuring out how to manage my time. I still had my full-time job, and balancing that with my side business was exhausting. I would work on client projects after hours and on weekends, often staying up until 2 or 3 a.m. But I knew that if I wanted to make this work, I had to make sacrifices. Eventually, I reached a point where my side business was bringing in more money than my day job. I knew it was time to take the leap. In 2018, I quit my job and went full-time with my business. It was terrifying. Suddenly, I didn't have the safety net of a steady paycheck, but I was ready. I had built up a client base, and I was confident in my ability to find more work. I moved into a small office and hired my first employee, a freelance designer who helped me with the creative side of the websites. That was the turning point. Over the next few years, my business grew. We expanded our services to include search engine optimization, SEO, and digital marketing, and I started hiring more people. We became a full-fledged digital agency, helping businesses not just build websites, but grow their online presence. Looking back, I can hardly believe how far I've come. In just a few short years, I went from answering phone calls at a call center to running my own successful business. We've worked with over 200 clients, ranging from small mom-and-pop shops to larger companies with national reach. We've won awards for our work, and our team has grown to 15 employees. I even sold my first startup last year for a substantial sum. But despite all the success, I've never forgotten how hard it was in the beginning. I still have moments of doubt, still face challenges that feel insurmountable. But I've learned to embrace those moments, to see them as opportunities for growth. I never would have gotten here if I hadn't taken that first step, if I hadn't decided to bet on myself. The journey has been long, and there were plenty of times I wanted to give up, but I kept going. And that's the best advice I can give to anyone thinking about starting their own business. Keep going. The road might be tough, but if you keep at it, you'll get there. I never imagined that a simple idea could change my entire life. Looking back, I often think about how everything started, how one moment of frustration with my daily routine led me to build something that changed the way I looked at business and life itself. It all began about 6 years ago when I was just another employee at a 9-to-5 job in an industry I didn't even care about. It was the kind of job that drained your energy and killed your creativity, but it paid the bills, so I stuck with it. I was in my late 20s, and I had dreams, big ones, but they were constantly overshadowed by the monotony of my routine. Every morning, I would wake up to the same feeling of dread, knowing I had to spend another day staring at a computer screen, dealing with clients I didn't connect with, and working on projects that didn't excite me. My boss was decent enough, but he didn't offer much in terms of growth, and I wasn't the type to sit around waiting for promotions. Then one day, it happened. I was scrolling through social media on my lunch break, a habit I had picked up to break up the endless boredom, when I saw a post from an old college friend. He had recently launched a business that was growing rapidly, and in the post, he shared a video about how he built his company from scratch. The video was raw, unpolished, but it was real. He talked about the struggles, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, and how he managed to push through it all. That video ignited something in me that I hadn't felt in years, a spark of excitement and possibility. I watched it over and over again, and the more I saw, the more I felt like I was being called to something bigger. I wanted to be the one telling my own story of struggle and success, but I didn't know where to start. For the next few weeks, I started researching. I read articles, listened to podcasts, watched YouTube videos. I absorbed everything I could find about entrepreneurship, business models, startups, and personal development. I even started reading books I had put off for years. But still, the question remained, what kind of business should I start? That's when the idea came to me. It wasn't something grand or revolutionary, but it was something that resonated deeply with me. I had always been passionate about fitness, but I had struggled to find a reliable, affordable source for high-quality fitness gear. Most of the equipment I bought was either overpriced or poorly made, and the idea of getting a good deal with decent quality was always a gamble. It was frustrating. That frustration, combined with my newfound knowledge of the business world, planted the seed for what would eventually become my company. I decided to start an e-commerce store focused on affordable yet high-quality fitness equipment. The concept seemed simple, but there were so many questions I had to answer. How would I source products? How would I set up a website? How would I market the business in a way that would stand out from the thousands of similar stores already out there? At first, the answers didn't come easily. I spent weeks doing research, trying to find reliable suppliers, testing different products, and designing a brand that felt authentic. I learned about drop shipping, wholesale, and even how to create an online store. I remember the first time I launched my website, it wasn't perfect, but it was live. It felt like a huge accomplishment to see something I had built from the ground up finally come to life. But the road ahead was far from smooth. My first few months were brutal. I had no idea how to drive traffic to my website. I spent hours and hours tweaking my Facebook ads, Instagram posts, and Google ads, only to see very little return. My sales were dismal. I remember sitting in my small apartment one night, looking at my bank account, and wondering if I had made a huge mistake. It was discouraging, but I wasn't ready to quit. I had come too far, and something inside me kept pushing me forward. Eventually, I realized that the key to growing my business wasn't just about throwing money at ads or relying on random marketing tactics. It was about building a community, a group of people who genuinely cared about fitness, quality products, and supporting a brand that aligned with their values. I started creating content around fitness, sharing tips and advice, and being transparent about my own fitness journey. Slowly, people started to engage. My followers began to grow, and with that, my sales started to pick up. It wasn't an overnight success, but things were slowly starting to click. As my business grew, so did my confidence. I was able to quit my 9-to-5 job and focus entirely on my company. I was now the boss, making decisions about what products to sell, how to market them, and how to connect with my customers. There were still many challenges along the way, supply chain issues, shipping delays, product returns, but I learned how to navigate each obstacle, and with every setback, I became more resilient. One of the turning points in my business came about a year into the venture when I decided to launch my first fitness-related blog. It was something I had always wanted to do, but I was afraid it would take too much time away from the core business. However, once I started publishing valuable content, training guides, nutrition advice, motivational posts, I noticed a significant increase in traffic. My blog became a powerful tool for building brand loyalty And soon, customers weren't just buying products. They were coming back for the content, for the community. The growth was exponential after that. I began to diversify my product line, adding supplements, apparel, and even online coaching services. I hired a small team to help with customer service, marketing, and logistics, and before I knew it, my company was generating more revenue than I had ever imagined possible. I was now able to travel, attend conferences, and collaborate with other businesses and influencers in the fitness industry. My life had changed beyond recognition. The craziest part is that I'm not special. I didn't have a massive inheritance or access to venture capital. I didn't have some kind of secret sauce or business formula. What I did have was a relentless determination to create something that mattered, a willingness to learn, and the courage to keep pushing even when things got tough. As I look back at where I started, I can't help but feel grateful for the journey. It hasn't been easy, but it has been incredibly rewarding. Today, my business is thriving, and I am living the life I once only dreamed of. And if there's one thing I've learned through this entire process, it's that anyone can make it as an entrepreneur. You don't need all the answers at the beginning. You just need to take that first step. The rest will follow. I've always been a dreamer. Ever since I was a kid, I would spend hours drawing ideas for inventions, sketching out business plans, and imagining how I would change the world. But like most people, life had its way of redirecting me. I was never the most academically gifted, never the top of my class. Instead, I was the kid who hustled, the one who always found a way to make things work, sometimes the wrong way, but it worked. I grew up in a working-class family in a small town. My parents were both hardworking, but money was always tight, and their dreams were often deferred to make sure we had food on the table. That's not a complaint, just the reality of how things were. In high school, I got my first job at a fast food restaurant. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough for me to feel like I was doing something with my life. I was the best at it. I was efficient, I had a great rapport with customers, and I could handle pressure like nobody else. But one thing I noticed was the lack of business acumen in that job. It was all about cutting costs, rushing through orders, and keeping customers happy just enough to return. The thought came to me that businesses weren't really doing things for the right reasons. They were just out to make money. I hated that. I decided to go to college, but I wasn't sure what for. Business? Maybe. Marketing? Perhaps. Something with entrepreneurship? Absolutely. I ended up majoring in business administration, but I wasn't the type to spend hours in libraries studying theories. I learned by doing. So, I started a small online store selling t-shirts. I had no idea what I was doing. My first website was clunky, my designs were basic, and my marketing was non-existent. Still, I made a few sales. That was the spark. I realized that with enough effort, you could turn anything into a business. After graduation, I worked a series of odd jobs, sales, marketing, customer service, but none of them felt right. I was working for others, building their dreams instead of my own. One day, I walked out of a sales meeting feeling defeated. My boss had chewed me out for something trivial, and I realized that this was it. I could keep climbing the corporate ladder and working for someone else, or I could do something completely insane, start my own business. I didn't have much money saved up, but I had an idea. It was a risky one, but it was all I could think about. The idea came from a problem I saw in the market. People were buying a lot of low-quality products online, and most of them were being flooded with generic, cheap options. What if I could offer something different? Something of better quality, more personalized, with a focus on customer experience? It was a gamble, but I decided to go for it. I started my first real business with a small loan from a friend and every ounce of savings I had. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I was hungry for success. I found a niche in custom-made products, specifically personalized leather goods. There was an underserved market that wanted high-quality, customizable leather accessories, and I was going to give it to them. But there was one catch. I had no idea how to make leather goods. I spent months learning from YouTube, attending workshops, and connecting with people who knew more than I did. I scoured the internet for suppliers who could provide high-quality materials at a reasonable price, and I worked with local artisans to produce the first batch of products. My website was simple, the marketing was organic, but I had one thing that most people didn't: a story. Every product I made had a story behind it. People weren't just buying a leather wallet. They were buying something crafted with care, made by hand, and personalized for them. The first year was brutal. I barely made any sales. I worked 18-hour days, sometimes even longer, just to keep everything running. I was packaging orders, answering customer emails, managing the website, and doing everything myself. I didn't sleep much. My personal life took a hit. Friends stopped calling. Family didn't understand what I was doing. I was drowning in debt, but I kept telling myself that this was just the beginning. Then, something clicked. Word of mouth started spreading. A few satisfied customers left glowing reviews. People started sharing pictures of their custom leather goods on social media, and my business began to grow. I reinvested every dollar I made back into the business, buying better materials, upgrading the website, and eventually hiring a few employees. I also realized that branding was just as important as the product itself. Fast forward a few years, and I had a full-fledged company. We were no longer just a small operation. We were scaling. We were getting featured in magazines and online publications. Celebrities were buying our products, and we even had the opportunity to collaborate with influencers who truly loved what we were doing. My team was amazing, and together, we were building something that felt meaningful. We didn't just make leather goods. We created memories. Every product was a reflection of the person who bought it. But just when things were looking up, we hit another roadblock. One of our major suppliers went out of business, and I had to quickly find alternatives. The new suppliers weren't as reliable, and the quality of the materials started to suffer. We got complaints, returns started piling up, and I feared we might lose everything. It was a tough time, but instead of throwing in the towel, I doubled down on quality control. I spent hours sourcing new suppliers, tested hundreds of materials, and reworked our production processes. Within a year, we were back on top. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I wanted to quit, moments when I questioned whether the dream was worth it. But every failure was just another lesson, every setback an opportunity to grow. I learned how to deal with rejection, how to bounce back from failure, and how to keep moving forward even when things seemed impossible. Today, my company is thriving. We've expanded to different product lines, including custom furniture and apparel, and our brand is recognized for its commitment to quality and personalization. But the most rewarding part of it all is knowing that I built something from nothing. I took risks, I sacrificed, and I persevered. I'm proud of what I've accomplished, but I'm also grateful for the journey. If I had listened to people who told me it wasn't possible, or if I had let fear control me, I wouldn't be where I am today. The entrepreneurial path is never smooth, but if you're willing to put in the work, stay patient, and trust yourself, it's all worth it. To anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, I say go for it. It won't be easy. In fact, it will probably be one of the hardest things you'll ever do. But if you're passionate, if you believe in your vision, and if you're willing to push through the toughest times, you can make it. Because at the end of the day, your dreams are worth fighting for. I'll never forget the day everything changed for me. It wasn't a single moment that transformed my life, but a series of tiny decisions, risks, and lessons that all added up. And looking back, it's easy to say that it started with a mistake. It was a little over 7 years ago. I was fresh out of college, just a regular 22-year-old trying to figure out what to do with my life. I had this vague idea that I wanted to be my own boss, but the reality was I had no idea where to start. My degree was in business, and I had a full-time job at a marketing agency, but I felt trapped in the 9-to-5 grind. It wasn't that I hated my job, it was just that I knew deep down that I was capable of more. One Friday night, while sitting on the couch with a takeout pizza, I had an epiphany. I had been running a small Instagram account on the side where I posted about my personal life, hobbies, and random thoughts. It wasn't big, maybe 200 followers, but I noticed something interesting. People were commenting on my posts more and more, asking questions and engaging with me about the stuff I was sharing. A light bulb went off. What if I could turn this into a business? At that moment, I made a decision. I would quit my job and start my own social media consulting business. It was risky. I didn't have a safety net. I had no savings to fall back on. I didn't even know if people would pay for the service I was offering. But I felt like I had to go for it. I figured if it didn't work out, I could always go back to a regular job. So, I put in my 2 weeks' notice at the marketing agency, and within a month, I launched my business, branding myself as a social media consultant. The idea was simple: help businesses improve their online presence and attract more customers. I had a few basic skills that I'd learned at my agency job, but I was essentially winging it. To my surprise, I got my first client within the first week. A small local bakery needed help with their Instagram account. I didn't charge them much, just $100, but I was over the moon. That was the first step. That was the moment I realized I could actually make this work. Things went well for a while. I picked up more clients, worked late into the night crafting strategies, and slowly started to grow my portfolio. I was learning as I went, and the more I learned, the better I became at what I did. My prices went up, and clients became more willing to pay for quality work. But the reality of being an entrepreneur started to hit me hard. There were endless late nights, difficult clients, and the constant pressure to perform. There was no boss to turn to for guidance, no paycheck at the end of the month. It was all on me. But in the midst of the struggle, I also found freedom. The first big turning point came about a year into my business. I had finally started to make enough money to pay myself a decent salary, but I was stuck in a cycle of working with small clients that didn't really challenge me. I needed something bigger, something that would force me to grow. But I was scared to take that leap. That's when I had an idea. One evening, I was scrolling through Twitter and saw an ad for a marketing conference in a city a few hours away. It was expensive, but something about it felt like the next step for me. If I wanted to grow my business, I needed to get in front of bigger clients and connect with people who were doing what I wanted to do. I booked the ticket. The conference changed everything. I met dozens of people, from small business owners to influencers and even large marketing firms. I had a chance to talk to people who had been where I was and hear about their struggles and successes. I learned that networking was just as important as the work itself, and that finding mentors who could guide you was crucial. By the time I returned from that conference, I had more confidence in myself and my business than ever before. I raised my rates, rebranded, and started targeting larger businesses. But I still wasn't prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. One of the toughest lessons I learned came from my first big failure. A few months after the conference, I landed a huge client, a well-known clothing brand that was looking to revamp their social media strategy. I thought this was my big break. I went all in on the project, working long hours and pouring my heart into it. But it didn't go as planned. The client wasn't happy with the results, and they ended up pulling the contract after just 3 months. It was devastating. The loss of income was one thing, but the blow to my confidence was even worse. I questioned everything I'd worked for. But here's the thing, failure isn't the end of the story, it's just part of the journey. I took a step back, reassessed my approach, and decided to try again. I started by refining my processes, being more selective about the clients I took on, and improving my communication with them. It wasn't an easy fix, but it worked. I got better at what I did, and as time passed, I gained the trust of bigger clients. My reputation started to grow. As the business expanded, I hired a small team to help me manage the workload. This was another huge step. I was used to doing everything myself, but I realized that in order to scale, I needed to delegate. It was hard letting go of control, but it paid off. My team brought fresh ideas, and together, we were able to handle more clients and deliver better results. This was when I truly understood what it meant to be a leader, not just an entrepreneur. 5 years into my journey, I found myself running a successful social media marketing agency with a small but dedicated team. We were working with large clients, and my business was making more money than I ever imagined possible. But what I hadn't anticipated was how quickly things could change. The pandemic hit, and everything ground to a halt. In a matter of weeks, our clients started canceling contracts, and revenue dried up. I had to make tough decisions, cutting salaries, laying off employees, and even taking on extra work myself to keep the business afloat. It was a dark time, but once again, I learned that resilience is key. We adapted, pivoted to remote work, and found new ways to serve clients. Slowly, things started picking up again. Now, 7 years later, I can proudly say that my business is thriving. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about the impact we've had on the businesses we've worked with and the people I've been able to employ. I'm still learning, still growing, but I've come to understand that success isn't a destination, it's a journey. Looking back, I realized that every decision, every risk, and every failure brought me closer to where I am now. Entrepreneurship is messy, unpredictable, and often exhausting, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And for me, it's been the most fulfilling journey I could have ever taken. It was the summer of 2017, and I had just quit my stable, 6-figure job in finance. I was 32 years old and had spent the last decade climbing the corporate ladder, ticking off all the boxes that society tells you will lead to happiness: high salary, luxury apartment, expensive car, vacations to exotic locations. I was supposed to be living the dream, but something inside me felt off. I had always been the kind of person who loved to solve problems. I enjoyed analyzing complex data sets, optimizing processes, and finding the most efficient way to do things. But after a while, I realized that the problems I was solving at work weren't the ones that truly excited me. They were just numbers on a spreadsheet, things that didn't make a real difference in the world. That's when the idea hit me. I was at a bar one Friday night, talking to an old college friend who had started his own business. He was telling me about how he created a platform to help small businesses manage their social media accounts. It was a simple idea, but it had taken off. People loved how it made managing social media less time-consuming and more effective. As he spoke, I started thinking, why couldn't I do something like that? Why couldn't I build something that would have a real impact? So, without giving it much more thought, I decided to take the leap and leave my job. My friends and family were all supportive, but I could tell they were a bit concerned. "Are you sure you want to give up everything you've worked for?" my mom asked. "You have a great career, great benefits, and security." But I couldn't ignore the feeling in my gut that told me I had to take this risk. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to build, but I knew I had to try. After all, the worst thing that could happen was I'd fail and go back to working in finance. I'd still be able to pay the bills. I started brainstorming ideas for a business. I spent days reading books, researching industries, and talking to people who had successfully made the jump into entrepreneurship. I knew I wanted to build something scalable, something that would not only solve a problem but also make people's lives better. One night, after staying up late with a notebook full of ideas, I had a breakthrough. I'd been thinking a lot about the gig economy, how people were increasingly relying on freelance work, and how small businesses were struggling to find reliable contractors for short-term projects. That's when I realized there was a gap in the market, a platform that connected businesses with freelancers who had specialized skills. A platform where companies could quickly find the right person for a specific task, and freelancers could find work that matched their expertise. It seemed so simple, but at that moment, I knew it was the answer I had been looking for. I spent the next few months building a prototype. I used the skills I had developed in my corporate job, project management, strategic thinking, and networking to put everything together. I even managed to convince a few freelance developers to work with me on the project in exchange for a small percentage of the future profits. In the beginning, things were tough. There were nights I didn't sleep, constantly tweaking the platform and trying to perfect every little detail. I had no real technical background, so I had to learn how to code some basic elements myself. I made a ton of mistakes, but I kept pushing forward. The vision was clear in my mind. If I could create something that helped businesses and freelancers, it would take off. After 6 months, we launched the platform. I'll never forget that feeling of seeing it live for the first time. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was no longer just dreaming about building a business. I had actually done it. Now, I had to get people to use it. I reached out to friends, old colleagues, and anyone who might be interested in trying the platform. I spent hours on social media promoting it, even though I had no real following at the time. Slowly, but surely, businesses started signing up, and freelancers began filling their profiles. The first few months were a blur of trial and error. We had bugs, we had complaints, and we had days when I felt like it was all going to collapse. But there was one thing that kept me going: the users who were finding real value in what we had created. One small business owner emailed me to say that she had used our platform to find a freelance graphic designer for a logo redesign, and she couldn't believe how much time and money it saved her. That email meant everything to me. It was the first real confirmation that we had built something useful. As the months went on, we improved the platform based on feedback, added new features, and focused on growing our user base. I reinvested every penny of profit back into the business, hiring a small team to help with customer service, development, and marketing. There were setbacks, of course. One of our competitors launched a similar platform with a much larger budget, and we had to fight tooth and nail to stay relevant. But I was determined not to give up. Then, one day, we got a message from a major venture capital firm. They had heard about our platform and were interested in investing. I remember reading the email twice, convinced it was some kind of scam. But it wasn't. We had a meeting with the VCs, and they loved our vision. A few months later, we secured our first round of funding. That was a game changer. With the additional capital, we were able to expand rapidly. We hired more developers, launched a mobile app, and started advertising to a wider audience. Within a year, we had thousands of businesses and freelancers on the platform. It was no longer just a side project, it was a thriving business. Fast forward to today, and we're a team of 50, with plans to expand internationally. We've helped thousands of businesses find reliable freelancers and given freelancers a platform to showcase their skills. The best part? We've managed to stay true to our original vision, creating a service that makes people's lives easier and helps them grow their businesses. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. I never would have guessed that quitting my job and taking that risk would lead me to where I am today. There were times when I questioned my decision, when I wanted to throw in the towel, but every small win, every email from a happy customer, kept me going. Now, I'm more fulfilled than I ever was in my corporate job. I've learned that success isn't about the money or the status. It's about doing something you love and creating something that helps others. And while I'm proud of what we've built, I know that the journey is far from over. There's still so much to do, and I'm excited for the future. If you're thinking about taking the leap into entrepreneurship, my advice is simple. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There's no such thing. Just start. You'll make mistakes, you'll face setbacks, but if you're passionate about what you're building and stay committed, the rewards will come. I used to think that being an entrepreneur was all about having a groundbreaking idea, the kind of idea that would make you a millionaire overnight. The kind of idea that had people clamoring for your product before you even launched. But my journey was far from that glamorous vision. In fact, it started in the most ordinary way possible. It was 2015, and I was working a 9-to-5 job as a graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm. My salary wasn't great, but it was enough to live comfortably, and I had a good work-life balance. But deep down, I always felt like there was more I was meant to do. I didn't know exactly what that more was, but I could feel it nagging at me every time I sat at my desk. The corporate grind wasn't for me. I wanted to build something on my own. One evening, I was talking to my best friend, Mike, over beers at our favorite bar. He had been working as a software engineer for a startup, and we often joked about how we'd both leave our day jobs one day and do something big. But this time, something was different. Mike was telling me about an app he had been working on in his spare time. An app to help small business owners manage their finances more effectively. The app had a very basic concept, but the more he talked about it, the more it piqued my interest. I had always been fascinated by finance, even though I had zero background in the field. I started wondering if I could help Mike make the app more user-friendly, more visually appealing. I was a designer, after all, and I loved the idea of making something that could make people's lives easier. I didn't know much about coding or finance apps, but I had the drive and a little bit of creative energy to spare. The idea of working with Mike on a project that could actually help people and potentially make money was irresistible. We decided to team up. The first few months were chaotic, to say the least. Mike would code late into the night, while I would sketch out designs during the day. We would meet after work to discuss our progress, which was slow but steady. We had no funding, no real experience with startups, and no clear roadmap. But we had passion, and that, we thought, was enough. One of the biggest challenges we faced early on was figuring out the business model. We didn't want to build something that people would use once and forget about, so we decided to make it a subscription-based service. We had no idea if people would pay for an app like this, but we figured we had to try. The first few months were a blur of work and small setbacks. I was still holding down my day job, and Mike was juggling his full-time position. But we had a small group of beta testers who seemed genuinely interested in what we were doing, and that was enough to keep us going. Every time someone said they loved the app or gave us constructive feedback, we felt like we were on the right path. But things really started to take off when we hit a major milestone. We got our first paying customer. It wasn't much, just $10 a month, but it felt like a huge victory. For the first time, we realized that people were willing to pay for our product. That simple $10 payment made us feel like we were no longer just two guys playing around with an idea. It meant we had something real. At that point, we decided to take the leap. We both quit our full-time jobs to focus on the app full-time. We knew it was risky, but we also knew we were at a crossroads. It was now or never. The first year after we both left our jobs was a blur. We poured everything we had, time, money, energy, into making the app the best it could be. We started running ads, talking to potential customers, and doing everything we could to grow our user base. But we also realized something crucial. We were terrible at marketing. While Mike was great at coding and building the app, I quickly learned that my design skills didn't translate into marketing skills. We were spending money on ads that didn't convert, and we didn't have the knowledge or expertise to optimize our marketing efforts. It was frustrating. For every dollar we spent on marketing, we saw minimal returns. It felt like we were pouring water into a bucket with a hole in it. But we didn't give up. Instead, we started learning. We took courses on digital marketing, read blogs, listened to podcasts, and sought advice from other entrepreneurs. Slowly but surely, we started to figure out how to make our marketing efforts more effective. We tweaked our ads, refined our messaging, and found ways to better target our ideal customers. And bit by bit, our customer base grew. It wasn't just the marketing that improved. We also started to see the fruits of our work in terms of product development. We listened to customer feedback, made improvements, and continued to iterate on the app. We built new features, fixed bugs, and made sure the user experience was smooth and intuitive. We realized that our app wasn't just about managing finances. It was about making people feel confident and in control of their businesses. That shift in mindset was what helped us differentiate ourselves from competitors. The real turning point came when we were invited to speak at a local tech conference. It wasn't a massive event, but it was a big deal for us. We used the opportunity to showcase our app, and we made sure to network with as many people as possible. That's where we met a venture capitalist who showed interest in our product. They didn't offer us funding immediately, but they encouraged us to keep going, gave us valuable advice, and even connected us with a few potential partners. That connection changed everything. Over the next 6 months, we raised our first round of funding. The investment allowed us to hire a small team, including a full-time marketing expert who helped us scale our efforts. With the new resources, we were able to expand our features, improve our user experience, and reach a wider audience. By the end of 2017, our app had over 10,000 paying customers, and we were finally making enough money to support ourselves comfortably. But the journey didn't stop there. We continued to iterate, improve, and grow. We faced new challenges, learned from our mistakes, and celebrated small victories along the way. Today, our app is used by over 250,000 small business owners, and we've expanded into other areas of business management. We've grown into a fully remote company with employees across the world, and we've raised multiple rounds of funding to fuel our growth. Looking back, it feels surreal. The late nights, the struggles, the doubt. Everything that seemed impossible at the time now feels like part of the journey. It wasn't an overnight success, and it wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The most important lesson I've learned from this journey is that success isn't about having a groundbreaking idea right away. It's about perseverance, learning from your mistakes, and adapting to the challenges that come your way. If you can do that, the rest will follow. As for me, I've realized that being an entrepreneur isn't just about building a business. It's about building resilience, adapting to change, and constantly pushing yourself to do better. And that's a journey I'm excited to continue. I was 27 when I realized I was stuck. The job I had worked so hard to get wasn't going anywhere. I had a degree in marketing, a decent paycheck, and a steady routine, but I wasn't happy. My boss was a nice enough guy, but he was a micromanager, and I could feel my creativity and passion for the job slowly slipping away. It wasn't just the job, though. It was the life I had created for myself. I had become complacent, just going through the motions without any excitement or challenge. It was 2017 when I first had the thought, maybe it's time to start something on my own. I was lying in bed one night, scrolling through social media, when I saw a post from one of my old college friends. She had just launched her own clothing line and was sharing her success story. She was talking about how much she loved being her own boss, making her own hours, and working on something she truly believed in. I had always admired her, but seeing her success up close made me realize one thing: I could do this too. The next day, I sat down with my laptop and did some research. I explored different business ideas, from starting a blog to launching a small online store. After hours of reading, I finally landed on the idea of creating a subscription box service. It felt like a great fit for my background in marketing and my love for discovering new products. I could curate boxes filled with unique, high-quality items and send them to people who love surprises. It seemed simple enough, but nothing ever feels simple at the start. I had zero experience with e-commerce. I didn't even know how to create a website, and I had no connections in the industry. The first few weeks were spent just trying to figure out what I was doing. I learned about branding, supply chains, websites, customer service, and everything else that came with running a business. I spent countless hours watching YouTube tutorials, reading blogs, and talking to anyone I could find who might know more than I did. It was a lot of late nights and a lot of frustration, but I was driven. In early 2018, I finally launched my subscription box service. I had spent months curating the products, designing the branding, and building a simple website. My first month's goal was to sell 50 boxes. That seemed like an attainable number, right? But reality hit hard. I sold 3. Not 300, not even 30. 3. And one of those was to my mom. I wanted to quit. I thought about it every single day. I thought about going back to my stable 9 to 5, telling myself that starting a business was a mistake. But something kept me going. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to keep trying. So, I threw myself into it even more. I spent the next few months tweaking everything. I rebranded the box, improved the website, and most importantly, I started reaching out to influencers and bloggers. I offered them free boxes in exchange for reviews. Slowly but surely, the word started to spread. But it wasn't just the influencers who were helping, my family and friends were also spreading the word. Slowly, my customer base grew, but it was still painfully slow. By the end of 2018, I had sold 300 boxes. It wasn't much, but it felt like a huge achievement. It was around this time that I realized the most important thing I had learned, the power of consistency. Every day, I showed up and put in the work. Even when it felt like no one was listening, I kept going. The next year was a game changer. I spent the first few months focusing on refining my operations, figuring out how to streamline the process of packaging and shipping. I was still a one-woman operation, and I was doing everything myself. But I knew that if I could optimize these systems, I'd be able to scale. I also started looking at my pricing strategy and realized that I was underpricing my boxes. After some careful calculations, I raised the prices, which allowed me to invest in better quality products and improve my packaging. With this new investment, I was able to improve the overall customer experience, and my retention rates started to climb. By mid-2019, I had my first viral moment. A well-known influencer posted a photo with my box, and within hours, my website crashed from the traffic. I had to scramble to make sure everything was running smoothly, but that viral moment was the boost I needed to take the business to the next level. In 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I had grown my subscription box service to over 1,000 subscribers. I was able to quit my full-time job and devote myself entirely to the business. But then the pandemic hit, and I was terrified. I thought for sure that the uncertainty and the lockdowns would spell the end of my business. People were tightening their belts, and a luxury subscription box seemed like something people would cancel first. But, unexpectedly, the opposite happened. People were stuck at home, and they were looking for ways to treat themselves. My business boomed. I grew by 500% in 2020 alone. It felt like the universe had opened up a window for me, and I jumped through it without hesitation. I hired my first employee, then a second, and then a third. Over the next few years, I expanded the product offerings in my subscription box and worked on building a loyal customer base. I also started focusing on customer service, something I had overlooked in the early days. I made sure my customers felt heard and valued. I offered personalized recommendations and made sure to send thank you notes with every box. It was all about making them feel special, and it paid off. In 2023, my subscription box service was generating 7 figures in revenue. I had a team of 15 employees, and we were shipping boxes to customers all over the world. I had created a brand that people loved, and more importantly, I had created a life I was proud of. I'm still in awe of how far I've come. There were times I thought I wouldn't make it. There were nights I stayed awake wondering if I was doing the right thing. But I kept going, and here I am. Now, I'm not just a business owner. I'm someone who inspires others to take that leap. It's amazing to look back and see how everything has come together. The sleepless nights, the doubts, the setbacks, it all led to this moment. Looking back, I can say without a doubt that I'm glad I took that first step. If I hadn't, I would have always wondered what could have been. And if you're reading this and thinking of starting your own business, do it. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. Stay consistent, embrace the struggle, and know that every small win builds towards something bigger. If I can do it, so can you. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.